Hello, fictional. Welcome to the Fiction Series X. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei meets with the Kendo girls? Part 4. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. The members of the student council stood across from Issei, katase and murayama. Sona had the 7 other pawn pieces sitting on the desk next to her. She knew Issei would need more than one piece, but the exact number was unknown. But before Sona would reincarnate him, some other parts of being a devil should be explained to Issei. Her hand traced over the pawn pieces as she looked back to the boy who would potentially become her only pawn. Issei, before I reincarnate you, I want to tell you what else goes into being a devil. Sona lifted her right hand, and a piece of paper appeared in it through the brief glimmer of a magic circle. The paper had the Citri family crest in the center. Sona held it out to Issei, who took it and glanced over the symbols. Devils are ranked by a class system. When someone is first reincarnated as a devil, they are considered low class, a servant devil to their king. The majority of devils are in this rank. The paper I handed you is a summoning seal. We use that to be summoned by humans to grant their desires for a fair price. This is one way that devils make their way into middle class. There is no difference between low and middle class other than the acknowledgement of your strength and knowledge by devil society. Performance in raiding games is among the ways to advance, as well as performance in a conflict like a war or battle of some kind outside of a raiding game. The pacts with humans and raiding games are the most efficient ways to go up in rank, since the ceasefire is still in effect. Sona said to Issei, watching him look over the summoning seal. From middle class you rank up to high class. The same methods are used to determine if someone is worthy of the title. When someone becomes a high-class devil, they are given a set of evil pieces to make a peerage of their own. Sona finished. Sona hadn't made Issei an official member of her peerage yet, but that didn't mean she wasn't thinking of ways to motivate him further, wanting to draw out his ambitions to become stronger. Sona, and by extension, Reya's, would need him to reach a level of strength that had never been attained in the amount of time they had left. And what better way to motivate someone who had been previously talked about making a harem than to subtly give him step-by-step instructions of achieving just that. Issei lifted his eyes from the paper, looking back to Sona. Aichu, is this a point-based system? A value placed on each commendation to know when I'd be able to go up a rank. Katase and Murayama, who were still standing directly behind Ice, listening closely to their talk. Sona hadn't paid them any attention, choosing to focus on Ice since he was the one she would be recruiting. They'd learned quite a bit more about devils today. The biggest piece of information being that, if Issei made his way up in the ranks, he could reincarnate people himself. As interesting as that was, the thought of Issei being in control over a group of people, probably all women, was frightening. Issei could hardly manage himself. Unfortunately not. The ones that are determined to be eligible to take the test to progress to the higher rank is overseen by a committee of elder devils. Sona replied to Issei. Well, there goes ever getting a peerage of my own. Never been good with first impressions Issei thought. The only positive first impressions he made had been with Sona that he could recall at least. I see. Is there anything else, Kaichu? He asked the violet-eyed girl. Sona nodded her head and held up her right index finger. Yes, one more thing. In the next month or two, we'll need to get a familiar for you. Issei's eyebrow rose in confusion. Issei had heard the term from videogames before, creatures mostly animal-like that were in some sort of master-servant pact. Much like Issei would soon be to Sona. Familiar? He asked. Sona pushed her glasses up on the bridge of her nose and nodded. Yes. A creature that is contracted to you only and will help you in any way you see fit. They come in a wide variety of forms. Most can only communicate with their master, but some are capable of speech. Issei thought about what kind of creatures he would have the chance to be contracted to. His thought slipped into wondering if there were any female humanoid familiars for reasons. But now that Sona had said all she felt necessary at this time, she brought him back to reality. Now that's finished. Issei, are you ready to be reincarnated? Sona said, trying to hide the excitement of having such a potential powerhouse being hers. Issei looked around the room. Yura was still looking at Issei like he was a mystery. Tomo had stopped being nervous about the kendo girls being in the room and gave Issei a bright smile with a thumbs up. Momo and Reya were both clearly excited that Issei would be joining their peerage. Tsubaki mirrored Sona's expression, which was that of a small smile. I'm ready. Issei said, coming back into eye contact with Sona. Sona stood in front of Issei, with 6 of her pawns in her left hand, the other 2 were in her right hand held up to Issei's chest. The 2 pawns started to glow lightly, meaning Issei needed more than only 2 pieces. This didn't really surprise Sona all that much. The power of a heavenly dragon was bound to be costly, but it was a price she was willing to pay. Sona had done this process a few more times, now seeing what reaction 6 pawns would receive, the glow was only a little brighter than before. Sona held her usual stoic expression, but some of her servants were getting nervous that he would require too many pieces. Momo bit her bottom lip, hoping to hear that he wouldn't require more than the 8 pieces given to each high-class devil. Reya was hiding the same emotion as Momo, she took to shifting her weight from side to side, trying to remain still. Sona placed all 8 pieces onto Issei's chest and felt them resonate in the familiar form they had for her with each previous time she used them. The pieces then started to glow much brighter than they had before and began to move around by themselves, forming a circle on the center of his chest. The Citri magic circle appeared inside the circle of pawn pieces, telling Sona that she only had to use the chant to complete the process. Sona took a step back, holding both arms out to the side, and started the chant to bring Issei into the world as a devil. She held her eyes closed as she focused on the magical process of binding the piece of herself in the pawns to Issei's soul, marking him as her servant. The rest in the room all waited with anticipation, seeing the final step starting to take place. In the name of Sona Citri, I call to you Issei Haidu, to reborn as my servant. You my pawn, flow with the tide of the underworld and live under my command. As Sona's command started, the evil pieces attached to Issei started to rotate around the magic circle counterclockwise. And as she finished the chant, the pawn sank into Issei's chest, making his skin glow the same azure blue from underneath his clothes. Sona opened her eyes and looked at Issei, seeing how the reincarnation went. When a human was reincarnated into a devil, there would be a surge of their demonic presence after the process took hold. She watched him as he looked at the way his skin was glowing. When the pieces started rotating on his chest, the feeling of being immersed in water came over Issei. But that quickly changed as the pieces started to be absorbed into his body. The calm sensation of floating in water changed into being swept away by the undertow of the ocean. Issei's eyes shot all the open as he stumbled, nearly losing his balance and falling face first onto the floor. As the glow started fading, so did the feeling of being thrashed around by the strongest water current he'd ever experienced. Issei let out a sigh of relief as he started to feel normal again. He looked at his hands in front of his face, clenched and unclenched his fists, seeing if anything felt different. He could feel the difference in the strength of his hands. Issei closed his eyes as his arms dropped back down. He remembered Momo saying that devils had really sensitive hearing, and judging by the sound of birds chirping and footsteps walking in the hall, that was true. Issei took in a deep breath through his nose and could smell and identify each of the perfumes the girls were using. The pleasant smell sent his mind back to his old ways, imagining them in bikinis, nurse outfits, naked aprons, and then finally just naked. Issei scrunched his face and bit the inside of his cheek to bring his hormones under control. This wasn't the time for fantasies. Issei opened his eyes and looked at the group he'd just become a part of. And was met with a scene he hadn't been expecting. All of the girls were staring at Issei, like he had grown horns or something, their eyes were locked onto him. Momo, Reya, and surprisingly Sona were blushing. Sona seemed to be the only one trying to fight it, biting her lip hard enough for it to start bleeding. Reya, normally clear light brown eyes, now looked hazy as she stared at Issei like he were ripe for the taking. Momo was squirming a little, her eyes shut, her legs tightly clamped against themselves, and the slightest sound of moans coming from the bubbly bishop. Issei sent the girls a worried look, not understanding that it was the surge of energy that flooded the room that caused this reaction. Issei looked back towards katase and murayama. They weren't looking at him the same way the student council was. They had confused expressions, even they had been able to feel the change coming from Issei, but didn't know exactly what the sensation was. So this is the presence of a dragon, amazing. Issei heard the voice of Tomo for the first time. Issei turned towards Sona's servants. Just as he made eye contact with Sona's knight, a different feeling than the one when the pawns entered him. A searing, burning pain that radiated throughout his entire body. Ugh. Issei grunted out as he fell to his knees. Ice. Murayama and katase yelled out, trying to catch him before he fell down, but quickly retracted their hands as they touched his arms. When their skin touched Ice's, it felt like his skin was on fire. Not just feverish, no, it was like they had touched the side of a pot of boiling water. Sona snapped back into her analytical persona, looking at her new pawn on his hands and knees. Sona stepped towards Issei and knelt down beside him. Momo ran up to the group on the ground, kneeling down in front of Ice and placing her hand on the side of his face. Her eyes widened in fear of the heat coming from him. She turned toward Sona, the volume of her voice almost screaming. Haichu? He's burning up. He'll die if we don't cool him down. Sona knew how hot the inside of his body was right now, she could feel it too, only on a lower scale. The evil pieces didn't just give the servant a piece of their king, it also established a link between master and servant. This connection was normally small, just enough to tell the emotions of the reincarnated devil. The king could almost read the minds of their servants if they practiced enough. Sona was good at reading her peerage and was able to tune out the connection normally. But she miscalculated what would happen if one person held 8 pieces in their body. The link had been there ever since the pieces formed the magic circle on Issei's chest. She felt the floating feeling. She felt it turn into a torrent of water trying to pull her under. And now, she felt like her blood vessels were filled with fire instead of blood. It was borderline excruciating. She couldn't imagine how it felt for Issei. I need him laying on his back. Sona said calmly, fighting off the burning sensation to try to help Issei. Both her and Momo covered their hands in a layer of water magic so they could withstand the heat and grabbed Issei by the shoulders. The water started to steam and evaporate just as soon as it came in contact with Issei, but they were able to flip him onto his back before the heat was unbearable. Once Issei was on his back, his eyes were fluttering in pain but still remained closed. He took a ragged breath before making a strained attempt to ease the worry he could feel coming from his newfound connection to Sona. I'll be alright. Issei couldn't finish his statement as he passed out from the pain he'd been feeling. What's wrong with Ice? Why is he so hot? Katase asked Sona after she saw Issei lose consciousness. Her and Murayama kneeling at Issei's feet. Sona sat on her knees at her pawn's head, looking at him, wondering just how to cool him down so that he would be out of harm's way. The only way she could come up with at a moment's notice was to cover him in magically enhanced water, but she'd need someone else who was adept with elemental magic. Sona raised her hand to her right ear as she thought of who to call for help and made a calm circle and called the one who had a lot to lose if they couldn't save Issei. The circle spun as the connection was being made. When it stopped, she heard idle chatter in the background. Hello? Came the voice of Reya's Gremory from the other side. Sona wasted no time in asking for the assistance of her rival. The urgency of her request was clear as day by the tone of her voice. Reya's. I need you and Akeno in my office immediately. We need to cool Issei off before his body fails. Sona commanded, yet the concern was clear. Sona heard all the talking on the other end stop, her voice was loud enough to be heard by everyone in her clubroom. Some shuffling was heard through the circle before Reya's replied and then ended the call. We're on our way. Hold out until we get there. Was she said as she ended the calm circle. Sona summoned the purest and coldest water she could muster, which wasn't even a quarter of the amount she needed. She covered Issei's neck and the inside of his thighs with the water, having it act like an ice pack, cooling the larger arteries in the body. Sona watched as the water started to lose the magical stability it had and started steaming off once more. She couldn't afford to summon more until Reya's arrived with Akeno. Pacing herself was important here. If she exhausted herself, then that could end badly for Issei, either comatose for life from an overheated brain. Or dead. Tsubaki had run next door to the infirmary, grabbing ice packs to hold on Issei until Reya's and Akeno made it to them. Thankfully that didn't take very long, even with the distance from the old school building to their location. Reya's and Akeno burst into the door, panting slightly, and made their way to Sona kneeling on the ground still. Sona made eye contact with Reya's, seeing the sweat start to form on her brow, a combination of the heat and physical exertion. What do you need us to do, Sona? Reya's asked, not wasting any time on learning what caused this to happen. She could hear about that after Issei was stable. Sona straightened up from her more relaxed stance she had while she was waiting for help to arrive. She summoned the enhanced water once more, placing on the same spot she had before. Before addressing Reya's. Summon water at the highest purity and coldest temperature you're able. Reya's, place yours at the underarm and forehead. Akeno, make yours blanket his torso. Sona gave out her instructions, hoping the ice packs had done enough to give them the time they needed. Reya's and Akeno didn't bother responding, instead doing as Sona had requested. They placed the water onto the designated spots on Issei's body and it seemed to be holding, at least for now. Sona, Reya's and Akeno were now standing and were talking about what put the boy in this position. The pieces took hold and he seemed alright at first. Reya's, you're familiar with the surge of energy from a newly reincarnated servant, correct? Sona asked Reya's, who nodded in response, so Sona continued. The surge, only a minimal amount of it was of devil origin. The rest was the energy signature of a dragon. Reya sat herself on top of Sona's desk, crossing her legs and arms as she went over the information, but she'd never seen a reaction like this before. But after recalling Sona's words, she asked her question. Sona, you said pieces as in multiple were used to reincarnate Issei. How many did you have to use? Reya's asked Sona. Sona sighed, she knew what reaction was about to come her way, but she'd find out eventually anyway. Yes. Issei required all 8 pawn pieces to be reincarnated. Both Reya's and Akeno faltered and shot Sona a look of disbelief. They'd only heard of people of Satan class strength needing that many pieces to be made into a devil. And this was only a teenage boy who hadn't even awoken his sacred gear. All 8 pawns, Reya's exclaimed. The sound of her yelling caused Issei to stir slightly before returning to his motionless posture. Momo, Reya, Katase and Murayama were all seated around Issei, waiting to see when he'd wake up. Momo brushed the hair out of his face, the worry still plastered on her face. The unconscious Issei leaned his head into the touch, causing all 4 girls to sigh with a smile. He seemed to at least be doing a little better. Momo had been racking her brain for the cause of Issei's pain and had found something interesting that might explain it. So she looked up to her master, calling out to her. Haichu? I think I might know why Ice is like this. The entire room paused in their actions, looking towards Momo, Sona included. Please tell Momo. Sona said to her bishop. One of Momo's skills was sensing a being's energy. It wasn't quite on the level of a capable senjutsu user, but it was better than most others. It was also what made her intuition a force to be reckoned with. But Momo along with the other 3 girls were distracted by the green light that started pulsing Issei's left hand. Aichu, Ice's hand, it's glowing again. Reya said, not paying attention if she had interrupted any current conversations. The object of her attention was laying there, unconscious, and there was little that would tear eyes and ears away. Sona and Reya's walked up to where Issei was laying, looking at his left hand, and that same green glow was there. Reya's looked on in great interest, having not experienced what the student council had the previous day when Alsha had taken control of Issei. She looked at the symbol on Issei's hand and was baffled when she didn't recognize it, especially since she fancied herself reasonably acquainted with most written languages that were still around. Sona looked at the glow, and a glimmer of hope spread itself through her, hoping if this were Alsha that she could explain what was going on in Issei's body. Murayama and katase looked at the glow in awe, not drawing the connection to the green and blue glow they had seen coming from Issei's bedroom window yesterday. Sona's hopes were answered as the glow brightened, but the voice that came from the hand of Issei confused and slightly angered Reya's. Hello again, Sona Citri and her peerage. Oh. Murayama and katase, you're here too. Alsha spoke from Issei's hand. When Alsha spoke, Sona's attention was solely on the spirit. The only voice she would concern herself with at this moment was hers. Murayama and katase on the other hand had turned from expressions of awe to confusion. What was this voice, and why did it know who they were? Sona answered the voice for the group. Hello. Issei wanted them to be here with him. Do you mind if I ask what's happening to him? Alsha hummed the words of how to properly explain Ice's predicament and how it was being handled. Well, in short, the 8 pawns used on Ice, while required to reincarnate him, were too much for his current body to control. It made his body start to tear itself apart, however, I'm handling it. Ice will be just fine by tomorrow morning, he will need some time to adjust though. Sona crossed her arms gently, listening to the Norse fire dragon. The condition of her pawn was Sona's top priority at the moment, and she wanted to know just what was being done to him to rectify the problem. Forgive me if I come across rude, but can you tell us what you're doing to fix the problem? And is there something we can do to hasten the process? Alsha giggled lightly at Sona. Had Alsha not been able to access the connection between her and Issei, she may have been insulted by the tone she used, but Alsha could feel that she was only worried for her new servant. And that was a trait she respected about the Citri family, even if their connection to their servants wasn't as famous as the Gremories. If Yufu, no need to apologize Lady Citri, I can feel the connection with you just as Ice can. The excess power had already started to damage some vital organs, so I'm altering them. His lungs, heart and blood vessels to be specific. The only thing for any of you to do now is wait for him to wake up, which should be tomorrow morning. Sona heard the kendo girls gasp when they heard Ice's heart and lungs had been damaged so quickly. Had this mysterious voice not taken action, he'd likely be dead very soon. Sona had an idea of how Alsha was altering Issei's physiology, but asked just to be certain. As it may just change how she trained Issei over the next year. And by alter the damaged organs, you mean replace them with the dragon's equivalent, correct? That is correct, Lady Citri. The problem was that when the power increase took hold during the reincarnation, Ice took a deep breath and activated a fire-breathing ability of his sacred gear. His human lungs weren't capable of withstanding the heat so soon. The heat then spread through his veins and arteries, damaging them along with his heart. The dragon organs will be better equipped to handle the strain of his abilities. Alsha said, trying her best to explain the exact cause of Issei's need for new body parts. Reya didn't know who this Alsha person was, nor did she care at the moment. What she did care about was the fact that Sona lied to her, which was more unacceptable when she recalled the fact that she promised to marry this boy if he helped defeat Razor. Reya had accepted being married to the Red Dragon Emperor, but not this unknown apparently female dragon. Her outburst over her assumptions taking hold of the conversation. But you should know, there are some side effects. Alsha said, simultaneously as Reya spoke louder. Sona. What the fuck are you trying to pull here? She asked with a dangerously low and gravely tone. Sona caught on that Reya was mad about something, but didn't realize that she was the only one who knew about Alsha Levitine, due to her family's interaction with a legendary boosted gear user. Reya stepped closer, her eyes changing from the usual serene bluish green to crimson orbs of fury. What are you talking about, Reya? Sona asked. Reya started to shake, rage threatening to boil over. I'm talking about our deal. You promised me the Red Dragon Emperor. That was who I agreed to marry if he beat Razor. Reya yelled out, her crimson aura flaring around her. Murayama and Katase both heard the conversation happening between the two high-class devils, but their reactions were vastly different. Murayama was alarmed at the mention of Reya's being married off to Issei. And Katase at the mention of a potential problem when Issei wakes up. What? Murayama yelled out, referring to the marriage comment that wasn't something Ice told them about. Katase was getting just as angry as Reya's, but for people speaking over the voice coming from Ice. She needed to hear what would happen when he wakes up, hoping it wasn't too bad. Everyone shut the hell up and listened to her. Katase yelled at nearly the top of her lungs, getting everyone in the room to quiet down instantly. Reya's eyes were still crimson with fury, but agreed that listening to the absent female voice was a more pressing matter. Sona quickly shut out the thought of why Reya was angry with her, giving her attention once again to Alsha. Seeing the room quiet down, Alsha repeated herself. Right, as I was saying, Ice will experience some side effects for about the first few days after waking up. What kind of side effects should we expect? Sona was quick to ask. Alsha gave a response that only really upset Katase and Murayama, while Reya and Momo were a little excited to see this. Since Ice is having a good amount of his more vital parts changed into that of a dragon's, he will act more like a dragon does. His actions will driven by more primal urges. Katase sighed, that was not what she was expecting. But a pervy Ice was better than a dead Ice. She never thought she'd say that ever. Just great, Ice the pervert is coming back. Katase said, defeated. All that hard work seemingly for nothing, not that it was really his fault. Reya chuckled before looking towards her bishop counterpart. That sounds like it could be fun, doesn't it, Momo? Issei had been taken home to rest until his body's functions were back to normal, or what would be his normal state from now on. Sona requested that Momo and Reya use a magic circle to bring Issei home and place him in bed, meanwhile she would walk to his house with Reya's and the kendo girls. Sona, Katase and Murayama wanted to be there to ensure that Issei was properly taken care of. Reya's hadn't gotten any answers as to why Sona had lied about Issei being the host of the Welsh Dragon, and once Issei's care was handled, she would continue that conversation. The group of 4 girls walked along in silence. Murayama and Katase walking side by side in front of Sona and Reya's. The human girls were wondering just how Ice's mom would handle 4 new girls, suddenly appearing to be with her son. She'd warmed up to the two of them over the months they hung out with Ice, and had been dropping not so subtle hints that she approved of either of them pursuing a relationship with her son. Up until only recently, they both would have adamantly refused that they saw him in that way. Sona was thinking of what Alsha had said about the change in Issei's body. An ability of the boosted gear that enabled the user to breathe fire had started to burn Issei from the inside, but would have a better chance at controlling it after his recovery. Alsha must have already completed a portion of changing the organs because Sona still felt heat coming the link to Issei. But this wasn't a heat that harmed either of them, it was more of a comforting feeling, like sitting in front of a campfire. That brought thoughts of the coming months how to proceed with Issei's training. Sona and her family were expert users of water and ice magic, so while she could spar with him to increase the strength of the legendary dragon's fire, she couldn't help him control it. She'd need to look for someone who was familiar with those types of flames. 2 beings came to mind, one who held the hottest fire attack known amongst current dragons, and the other was rumored to be able to freeze even the famed phoenix flames. The silent walk came to an abrupt end as they approached the Haidu residence. Murayama and Katase stopped just outside of the fence leading to the front door and turned to the 2 older girls behind them. Ice President, how are you going to explain Ice getting home without his parents hearing? And all of the extra girls? Murayama asked. Reya rose an eyebrow when the brunette said extra and looked to Sona. Sona met Reya's gaze and gave a sigh. She didn't like having someone else handle what should be her task, but Reya's was better suited for this. I believe it would be best for Reya's to handle that, her family has always been the more charismatic type. She said, bringing a smile to Reya's face at the compliment, while the kendo girls held a narrowed gaze. Yay, we know. Katase murmured, thinking back to how they came to learn about the existence of devils. Reya ignored the comment and stepped past them, up to the door. The smile didn't leave the crimson heiress's face as she rang the doorbell. A distant voice was heard saying 1 minute as footsteps could be heard by the devils with their superior hearing. Only a few more seconds passed before the door unlocked and opened revealing Mrs. Haidu. She smiled as Yui and Kaori were the first ones she saw, then she grew curious as to who the other 2 girls were. Yui and Kaori, so good to see you again so soon. And you 2 must be the ones Momo and Reya said would be coming over to check on Ice. She said, greatly surprising Murayama and Katase. Reya and Sona recognized the signs of mental manipulation from the eyes of Mrs. Haidu. Yes. My name is Reya Gremory, 2nd year at Kuo Academy. This is Sona Shitori, also a 2nd year student, we're both friends of your son. Reya said in a sweet voice, not seeing any reason to use any magic to further alter the thoughts of her potential mother-in-law. Issei's mother smiled, then moved in line to the open door, gesturing for the group of girls to come inside. It's so nice to see Ice gaining friends that really care for him. Please, come in. Ice is upstairs asleep with the other two. Try not to wake him, alright? Yes, of course. Reya said, still holding her smile. She stepped inside, Sona quickly followed, both taking their shoes off in the entryway. Murayama and katase rushed in the door, flicking their shoes off and sped up the stairs to Issei's room. Mrs. Haidu raised a red flag in the minds of the kendo girls with the way she worded things. They both thought that Momo and Reya were doing something more than just seeing to Issei's well-being. Reya's just blinked in confusion at the speedy getaway of Issei's friends. Inside the boosted gear, Ice, wake up Ice. A somewhat familiar and feminine voice rang out from above Issei as he slept. Issei only turned onto his right side, trying to ignore the voice wanting to disturb his peaceful rest. He rarely slept this well, his body was at just the right warmth, the only thing that seemed off was how high his pillow was lifting his head. His eyes still closed, Issei tried to reach under his pillow to adjust it. His hand coming in contact with two sensations that started to pull him awake. The back of Issei's hand felt like it was touching grass, while his palm was touching something soft yet firm, like flesh covered by thin clothing. Ifufu, I didn't know you warmed up to me that quickly. What is it that clock of yours says each morning? Oh yes. Ice, wake up or I'll kiss you. The woman's voice said, as Issei felt a hand brush his hair away from his face. Issei's eyes shot halfway open and saw only white, with a shadow being cast down from above. He blinked a few times, trying to clear the sleep away to make sure his eyes were working right. The white material hadn't changed, but the shadow had moved slightly. Issei turned his head left to see what was making the shadow and was met with the emerald and sky blue eyes of Alsha, who was smiling down at him. Instead of removing himself from his position, Issei turned his back to his resting spot, closing his eyes again. The hand that had tried to move what he thought was his pillow pulled him closer into the abdomen of Alsha with a small smile on his face as the sense of his surroundings came to him. The scent of a plethora of different flowers came into Issei's nostrils. He mumbled to the past wielder with a tired voice. You smell nice, Alsha, like flowers. Alsha ran her hand through Ice's hair again, still smiling down at the boy. She wouldn't mind staying like this if the circumstances were different, but she needed Issei to be awake. Alsha removed her hand from Ice's hair and pinched his cheek lightly. Not enough to hurt, but enough for the sensation to register and wake him up a bit more. Thank you for the compliment, Ice, but I need you to wake up, we need to talk about the changes happening with your body. Issei's eyes opened again, this time all the way. The memory of what happened starting to come back. Sona reincarnating him into a devil, and then the burning pain that he felt just a moment after, then passing out. Issei pulled his head back, his right hand propping him up. Issei looked over to where his other hand was. The grass he thought he felt was there, but when he pulled himself closer to Alsha, he'd been grabbing rather firmly onto her rear. Issei quickly removed his left hand as he blushed and tried to apologize. Sorry about grabbing you like that. Alsha chuckled, she wasn't mad, since she knew he didn't realize where he'd been touching her. Ifufu, that's alright Ice, no harm done. Issei sat up, now feeling ready to hold a conversation. He looked around briefly, seeing that he was back in Alsha's garden, so that meant he was back in his sacred gear. How this was possible would no doubt confuse Issei for a long time, but if magic was real, then there probably was an explanation for this too. Done looking at his surroundings, Issei made eye contact with Alsha. You wanted to talk about something. Is it about me turning into a devil? He asked the foreign blonde. Alsha shook her head at Issei. Her right hand moving towards Issei's chest with her index finger extended, poking it directly where his heart is. That's part of it. Your heart, lungs as well, that's what I need to talk to you about. She said, removing her hand, bringing both of her hands to her lap. Issei tilted his head a little to the side. Is there something wrong with them? Do you know what that pain I felt was from? Issei asked her, coming to realization that she knew why that burning feeling had come over him. Issei's full attention now on Alsha. There was something wrong, but it's fixed now. I'm sorry I didn't have the time to ask for your permission before I started the process. Alsha said, her eyes lowering down to the ground, hoping that Ice would take the news well. Alsha took the silence as a sign that Ice wanted her to explain what happened, so she did. When Sona Citri placed the pieces inside you, there was a burst of power that flooded your system. That unlocked your sacred gear, along with a few of its abilities, one of which you unintentionally activated. When you took a deep breath in, you started a fire-breathing attack. Your body didn't have time to adjust, and the heat from it damaged your heart and lungs. So I had to replace them with dragon parts. Issei had been listening intently, and his mouth dropped open when she said that he now had the heart and lungs of a dragon. And would be able to breathe fire. That sounded awesome. But Alsha didn't sound excited about it, so was there some sort of drawback to it? He wasn't really familiar with the weaknesses of dragons, so only the pros of dragon organs came to mind, and if he was honest, Unless there was a big con to being turned into more of a dragon, he wouldn't mind having a few more. Would I have lived if you didn't change the parts that were damaged? Alsha took a moment to think. There was the possibility that Sona could have come up with sort of plan to heal him, but she wasn't willing to wait to see if it would come quick enough. The damage would have killed you within an hour. Your heart couldn't move the blood well enough, and your lungs couldn't take in enough oxygen from the air. Issei gave Alsha a bright smile, trying to show that he wasn't mad, and understood that she was only looking for his well-being. Thank you for saving me. I really appreciated Alsha. The downcast look left Alsha's eyes, coming back to happy glint that was there before. You're welcome, Ice. Now, let's go over the pros and cons of your new dragon parts. Back in Issei's room, Murayama had been the first one to burst through the door, not using the common courtesy of knocking, thinking that she would catch Ice red-handed in bed with him. She hadn't been completely wrong, but what she saw wasn't inappropriate in any way. Ice was there on his bed, still asleep, with both Momo and Reya sitting cross-legged to each of his sides on the bed. Momo just sat there, hands in her lap, clenching her interlaced fingers every so often. Murayama was surprised that Reya would be the more forward of the two girls. Reya was holding Ice's left hand with both of hers, her thumb tracing circles on the back of his, her eyes not leaving Ice's face to even register that there was a new entry in his bedroom. Addis quickly followed into the room, seeing the same thing as her friend, and was relieved that nothing had happened while she wasn't there. Instead of following the lead of the two devil girls, Katase took her seat on the chair at Ice's desk, spinning herself around slowly. Murayama took a seat at the edge of the bed, by Ice's feet, which were underneath the blanket. Addis stopped spinning in the chair, hearing Reya's and Sona making small talk with Ice's mom, then looking towards Ice and asking what was on her mind. Do you know what or who that voice was that came from the glow on Ice's hand back at school? Can we trust that they're actually taking care of Ice? She asked, looking more towards Momo, since she had been around the white-haired girl more than Reya. Reya looked up from Ice, hearing the question, and looked towards Momo to see if she would be the one to answer. Momo wasn't paying attention to anything but Ice, she was unreachable at the moment. Reya sighed and turned her gaze towards the girl in the spinning chair, making sure that her voice carried its typical gentle air, not wanting her worries to bleed through too much. The voice was a past wielder of Ice's sacred gear. Her name is Alsha Levitain, she was known as the Norse Fire Dragon. Alsha had a reputation of being nothing but an honest and reliable person while she was alive, so I believe that we can put our faith in her and know that she is doing what she needs to help Ice through this. Addis nodded towards Reya as thanks for placating her worries. She resumed spinning in the chair until footsteps rang throughout the hallway, then Sona entered the room with Reya's directly behind her. The human girls watched in curiosity as Reya's closed the bedroom door and Sona approached Ice's sleeping form. Sona stood just to the right of Momo and placed a hand on Ice's chest, where the evil pieces had centered themselves. Her blue magic circle appeared in between her hand and his shirt, spinning around clockwise, before quickly changing direction. It did this for 30 seconds before the light died, and Sona adjusted her glasses before speaking, her eyes lingering on Murayama and Katase more than anyone else. Ice is doing just fine, all damage has been healed, so he's just resting now. Sona said in her analytical voice. Murayama let out a sigh. Then her gaze settled on Reya's, thinking back to her outburst in the student council office. That's good. Since Ice is okay, mind telling us just what you meant when you mentioned marrying Ice? She said as her eyes narrowed, Katase following her expression and nodding in agreement. Reya's met the look of the humans in the room in kind. Crossing her arms. That's between Sona, Ice, and myself. Her short response only angered Murayama and Katase, but surprisingly, Murayama was the one to voice their issue. There's nothing that he doesn't tell us. So if he didn't mention something like him being set to marry someone, then I doubt that Ice knows about it himself. So we'll ask again, what was that about? Instead of answering the question, Reya's only tried to prove them wrong, thinking there was no way that they knew everything about the boy in question. So she used a subject that most men would hold to themselves, even in their dying breaths. Really now? You know everything about him? Even what place and material he uses to masturbate? Sona turned her head away from the group in slight embarrassment. Momo and Reya listened in interest, while Katase and Murayama held smug grins. Katase crossed her arms, one leg crossed over the other and bouncing. Of course we know everything. He likes this chair, Katase said, pointing to the chair she was currently sitting in. And Ice has a breast fetish, size isn't particularly important, but larger ones catch his attention easier. So he likes to recall the girl with the best breasts he'd seen recently. Addis looked at Reya's as the crimson-haired girl's expression turned from an uppity snob into one of disbelief. And that damn fetish could have gotten the three of us in trouble with your mother. She thought to herself afterwards. A subtle shiver coming to her as she recalled the sultry look that Venerana Gremory had given Ice if he'd been allowed to talk to her any longer. Who knows what would have happened? So you can either tell us what this whole marriage talk is about now, otherwise when Ice finds out, so will we. Murayama picked up the conversation, tag-teaming their senior schoolmate. Sona decided for her and Reya's and told them just what the plan was in regard to having Ice marry Reya's. She was also thinking whether or not to tell them about the potential for Ice to marry her as well. Reya's and I have both been an object of interest in the devil world ever since we were born, and when I say object, I mean just that. The elder devils believe that it's better to keep the pure-blooded devils pure instead of letting love or free will reign. So arranged marriages are put in place. In both of our cases, it was as soon as they knew we were female. I managed to strike an agreement with my family that my betrothed needed to beat me in a game of chess to be deemed worthy. Reya's wasn't as lucky. The ones that have held an interest in either of us only saw us as a way to further their own political power. As objects. So when we were young, we agreed that if either of us found a way to keep the other from falling into this hell, we would. The kendo girls had eased their glares a little, listening to Sona describe the view devils had on marriage. Katase and Murayama knew that they'd do anything to save the other from the same situation if they were placed in it. But that didn't explain why they chose to use Ice. And just what does that have to do with Ice? Katase asked. Sona sighed. I was getting to that. I haven't had the chance to talk to Issei about this arrangement yet. But you see, this marriage would be on paper only, a way to prevent other devils from claiming either of us for themselves. Issei is the best candidate we've come across so far, for two main reasons. The first is the fact that Issei is the host of the Red Dragon Emperor, whose power is both respected and feared by all races. The other reason is who Issei is as a person. His rumored perversion aside, Issei is a kind and caring person, something most male pure-blooded devils are severely lacking in. While the higher devil society will not like a devil being married to a non-pure blood, they would never think of angering someone carrying a dragon that has the power to level most of the underworld. She said, revealing her plan to have Issei marry her as well, which wasn't missed by the kendo girls. Instead of yelling out at hearing Ice being married to both girls, they took the information in and questioned how this was possible. In human society, marrying multiple women was usually frowned upon, and how was Sona sure that Ice would even agree? And how do you know Ice will even agree to this? Murayama quickly asked. Knowing full well that Ice still had dreams of a harem, one that consisted of women that he loved and loved him in return. Reya's meanwhile was looking at Sona accusingly. Why was she still claiming that the boy on the bed was the host of the Welsh dragon? That voice was that of a woman, and Drake was a male dragon. Her patience was starting to wear thin. When she first met Issei, she too thought she saw the red heavenly dragon when Issei helped her off the ground, but Sona should have known otherwise once she reincarnated him. She wanted answers, but knew that getting angry with Sona would lead her nowhere, and Sona was not the type of person to lie. So just who did that voice belong to? While Reya was thinking, Sona was still giving Katase and Murayama her reasoning. I do not intend to force Issei to do anything. I merely planned on telling Issei the benefits of the situation, that with being married into either of our families, he would never want for anything material again. He would still be free to pursue whoever he wanted and marry them as well if he wishes. So is polygamy a common thing for devils? Katase asked, mainly thinking of the social reaction that humans would have, since she didn't know how devils viewed it. Sona nodded to the pink-haired girl. Yes, more commonly for men than women. Usually the head of a family, or a prominent devil, will take multiple wives to ensure that a child is born, as supernatural beings have an extremely hard time conceiving due in part to our long lifespans. In cases of a devil with a special bloodline or power, it's almost expected and encouraged. And with what Alsha said earlier about Issei becoming part dragon, I'm certain more families will try to marry off their children to him. Reya's eyes widened at hearing the name of the legendary Norse fire dragon, and one of the people she looked up to because of her strength and conviction. Reya's would often ask to hear the stories of her accomplishments on repeat as a little girl. Now she felt stupid for having ever doubted Sona, who was a long-term friend that never had a reason to lie to her in the first place. Katase and Murayama on the other hand were confused, sharing a look that said they were both feeling that way. Are dragons rare or something? Murayama asked innocently with her head tilted. Yes, incredibly so. There's only one that has been involved with devils willingly, and it was to gain land to grow food for other dragons. They typically hide themselves away, as their numbers were dwindled down to almost nothing over the years. They were hunted by those who feared their strength. Inside the boosted gear, Alsha had been explaining what would happen to Ice's body. She told him that since his heart had become a dragon's, he would slowly becoming more dragon than devil. The cells in his body would take in the dragon's signature as the blood was pumped throughout his body. So eventually he would gain the magical resistance that dragonhide provided and in about 8 to 9 months, be able to produce dragon wings. Most of the things she told him sounded positive to Ice, except that he would draw powerful enemies towards him, be weak to dragon slayer items, and for a short time, would have a hard time controlling his emotions and act on instinct. The biggest bonus, however, was drawing the attention of the opposite sex the more contact he had with them. And now they were standing in a clearing, waiting for the being responsible for all of these changes. Issei could see the red dot in the sky coming closer with each flap of its wings. He was a little nervous, he was about to be face to face with a dragon. He looked over to Alsha and saw her face was set in an expression like she was recalling fond memories. A few more flaps of its wings brought the full size of the red dragon into view and quickly descending to the ground. The Welsh dragon flapped his wings downwards to slow his descent. As his forelegs made contact with the ground shook from the weight suddenly added. Issei stumbled for a brief moment before regaining his balance, then looked up to the dragon's head in awe. He couldn't believe how big the figure just in front of him was. Drake had to be 100 long from head to the tip of his tail, his armor-like scales were crimson red and had glowing emerald eyes. Drake's eyes looked over to Alsha, then to Issei. He lowered his head to speak to his new host for the first time. Issei Haidu, you're aware of who I am, correct? His voice was deep and loud enough that it echoed off the hills and back to Issei. Issei nodded, still nervous of the powerful creature right in front of him, the one Sona told him had been part of the reason the three factions have the current ceasefire. Yes, you're Drake, the Red Dragon Emperor. Alsha chuckled from beside Ice, amused at how nervous he was. No need to be nervous, Ice, Drake won't hurt you. Issei looked over to her, smiling as she looked between him and Drake. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly, calming himself down. Drake bore his eyes into Issei, his new host. This is the first time I've had a host become a devil. It will be interesting to see how that affects your development. Thinking the words of the dragon were meant in a negative context, Issei asked his opinion on the matter. How do you feel about being attached to a devil? Drake raised his head a bit, staring at Issei still. Then looking over to Alsha as if trying to confirm something on his mind. Alsha merely nodded to the dragon. Drake moved his gaze back to Issei, the fierce emerald glow dyeing her Drake's eyes down a bit. What you are matters not, be a devil, human, or in your case a dragon-devil hybrid. What I care about is what you will use my power for. What is it you desire, my host? To protect my friends and family. Whatever I need to do to make sure they're safe, I'll do it. Drake raised himself back up to full height, his head held high, satisfied with the drive in Issei's eyes. Drake extended his wings. Very well, partner. My power is yours. Now. Let's get you used to your new abilities, tonight will be your initiation into how a dragon trains. Drake said, his tone changing into one that promised progress and a lot of pain. Haidu residence. A few hours after Issei was brought home, Sona had suggested that most of the group go their separate ways, but also have someone stay the night to watch over Issei. Murayama wanted to stay, but this was the one night per month that her parents would be home. Ever since Katase had moved in with Murayama, she would always find somewhere else to be when the parents were back for their one-day-a-month get-together, so she didn't feel she was intruding on their time together. Katase volunteered herself, saying that she would be staying no matter who else would be. Reya had also volunteered, but a phone call from her queen about a client shot that idea down. Momo and Reya were having a quiet conversation between themselves on which of them should stay, thinking that both would be a bit cramped. In the end, Sona gave her opinion, which was for Momo to stay with her slightly better healing prowess over Reya. And as much as Reya wanted to stay with Ice, she agreed with Sona's point. After the rest of the group left, Katase had brought Momo down to talk to Ice's parents and make sure that it was alright with them to stay the night. Ice's father was surprised by the quick of course given by his wife, he knew the pink-haired Katase, so no problem there, but this white-haired girl was a new face to him. But his wife seemed to know this girl, so he didn't argue, happy wife happy life, right? Katase had brought out 2 sleeping bags from Ice's closet, they were kept there in the event, her and Murayama stayed over and placed them in the guest room. Momo went back to Ice room for a brief moment to place a new type of magic she'd learned on Ice, one that would alert Momo if his vitals dropped or raised beyond a certain level. And once that was done, she went to the guest room where Katase and herself would be sleeping. Just before the girls fell asleep, Katase asked Momo a question regarding Sona, referring to her in the same way as Ice did. Momo, I thought since Sona Kaichu is now Ice's king, that she'd want to be the one here with him until he wakes up. Why didn't she stay? Momo turned towards Katase, her blue eyes closing as she felt her connection to Sona. Momo could slightly feel Sona, from what she understood, it wasn't all that difficult for the king to feel the pieces of their servants. But doing the reverse took a lot of concentration. She felt the exhaustion of her master, the hope that things would only get better from here, and the worry in case they got worse. If things were different, she would have, but she wouldn't have been of much use to Ice in her state. She's physically and mentally exhausted. Momo said to Katase. Exhausted? What do you mean? Katase retorted. When someone is reincarnated, it takes a certain amount of energy to do it, and that amount changes based on how many pieces that person needs. Each piece also makes a connection to the king, so they can feel a portion of what we feel, and it can't be shut off for the first 24 hours after the person is reincarnated. Kaichu used 8 pieces all at once on ice, that alone is an exhausting event. And she could feel his pain. Not on the same level as ice, but the strength of the connection between them because of those 8 pieces is incredibly strong compared to the others. Ada's eyes widened, hearing that Sona was feeling some of Ice's pain. She couldn't blame her for deciding not to stay. I see, all the more reason for her to want the next best person for the job. Good night. Good night. Midnight Issei's room. Adis had woken up, unable to stay asleep for very long, and decided to grab a glass of water. She downed the glass quickly, feeling the dryness in her throat leave. She didn't immediately go back upstairs and try to get to sleep again, she stared out of the window in the living room. Seeing the starlit sky, she took a deep breath, relieving herself of all the tension of the day. Adis felt better than she had before moving Ice back home. That concern for his life was brought up tenfold because of her damn abandonment issues. Yes, she knew she had them. And they hadn't even been brought on by anything all that traumatic, just her father needing to go off to other countries constantly for work. And her mother, well, she had memories of her mother. Adis started making her way up the stairs, but went into Ice's room instead of hers, just to check on him. She quietly twisted the handle and inch by inch opened the door, glancing between inside Ice's room and the hallway for people that might catch her. With the door opened enough for her to fit through, she made her way inside. Then closed the door just as quietly as she'd opened it. After she felt the door click shut, she looked at the one she wanted to see and tiptoed towards the bed. Issei was turned on his left side, slight sporadic twitches coming from him. She carefully sat herself on his bed, with just enough room to curl her legs to the side and entirely fit herself beside him. Adis brushed the hair on his head. Taking in the peaceful yet concentrated look on his face, it looked the same as when he would train with her in murayama, taking in information and enjoying the presence of those around him. Don't you dare go changing too much on us, Ice. As long as you keep that same honest and kind person, Murayama and I will help you with anything. Just please stay the Ice that we've come to know. Cadis thought as she brushed the bangs in his face to the side. She could hear Ice mumbling quietly in his sleep, so she leaned a bit closer to hear what it was. Dragon. Too hot. Stupid wings was what she could make out. She felt the strain of the day taking hold of her, a sudden need to sleep flooding her body. She went to lean back up and leave, but Ice suddenly turned towards her, arms stretched out and pinning her onto his bed with him. Adis made a surprised gasp as she found herself held tightly in his grasp. She tried to lift herself up, but didn't have the strength. Instead of fighting it, she relented to her situation. It didn't bother her too much, since this wasn't the first time she's laid in his bed with him. Finding a comfortable position, she moved her arm to Ice's, which was wrapped just under her chest. She gently rubbed her hand against his arm, feeling the heat radiating throughout his body to hers. Then she poked his forearm as she felt something different about him. His skin. It's tight, no, harder. Is that from the devil part or dragon? She thought, bringing her hand over his, closing her eyes and giving in to sleep. Ice pulled her closer to his body before mumbling the last thing Cadis heard before falling asleep. Mazalia's. Cadis's favorite. End of the part 4. So how was this story? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this story with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.